Thank you, Ryoshin. Thank you, Jisei. Um, I just gotta go through all these boxes and see your faces really quick. It just makes me so, and some waving. It just makes me so happy to see you all. So, so I'll be honest, I feel kind of silly here speaking with you all, giving a talk, expected to somehow expound the Dharma. Ryotan Roshi, he gave in a talk a few weeks ago, he said, spring is the best Dharma talk. And, I don't know if you can hear it in my computer, but, the sound of the birds outside, that's the best Dharma talk. And I wish I could leave it there and end the talk, but I think I would get in trouble. So I'll continue on. So I don't know about you, but the more that I practice, the more questions that I have, and the more sure I am that I don't have any answers. At least I've found that the important answers can't be found here. The part of me that likes to neatly categorize everything, to organize the world and the people in it into tiny little boxes that I can put up on a bookshelf. Neatly arranged, color-coded, labeled. Myself organized into a convenient little box. And isn't that the funny thing about trying to find answers in Zen? Many of us come to practice with a lot of questions, needing a lot of answers. Yet Zen 101 tells us that the most important answers can't be found in logic and our rational computer brain. It says the world is just too big for us to figure out. It's too big to organize on a bookshelf. Speaking for myself, I entered practice and Zen desperate for answers, desperate to find relief from my suffering. And I came to Zen as a last resort because, I don't know why, but the idea of sitting hours of Zazen just didn't seem appealing to me. And I'd also tried everything else already. I thought maybe if I had enough money, then I'd be happy. Maybe if I could just find the right boyfriend, a new apartment, a house in the country, substance abuse. So really, by the time I came to Zen, I'd exhausted all other options. And I think that's a great way to enter Zen. And like a lot of people, I came to Zen with a lot of suffering. And I should mention, the word suffering is used a lot in Zen, but, it's kind of a drama word, and it might not be relatable to everyone. We might also call it angst, dis-ease, anxiety, dissatisfaction. The word suffering became the most popular translation, but the original Sanskrit word was dukkha, which means a stuck axle wheel. So you can imagine, an animal-pulled cart in ancient India with a stuck wheel. For someone riding in the cart, it would mean for a very bumpy and uncomfortable ride. And the wheel might drag, making it really slow and hard to pull. And in that sense, I think dukkha is actually a very apt description for how life can feel sometimes. Just stuck, dragging, uncomfortable. So in trying to find relief from dukkha, from suffering, this practice seemed so revolutionary to me. To finally stop, sit down, shut up, stare at the wall, and stop trying so damn hard. So one of the first steps, for me at least, was to stop trying so hard. Stop trying to fix. Stop trying to escape. Because even the motion of directing ourselves away from suffering often leads to more suffering. It's like trying to keep the cart moving even after the axle wheel is stuck. And you know, anyone that sat meditation retreat and experienced the excruciating pain of back pain, you know, knows that there is no escaping pain. I remember I'd spend whole blocks on retreat, whole blocks of zazen, trying to wheel and deal with my back pain, as if I could only negotiate hard enough with my pain, or if I could perform enough mental gymnastics, then I could escape it. So I'd tell myself, okay, I'll try to ignore the pain. Maybe it'll go away. That wouldn't work. Okay, maybe if I move into a new sitting posture, and then I'll spend the next 5 minutes trying to move so slowly so that the person next to me wouldn't notice. Okay, that doesn't work. Maybe I'll strike a deal with myself. I'll just imagine how good it's gonna feel to lay in bed after zazen, and I'll barrel through this pain like a bull in a china shop. And that was often the most excruciating experience. And I think some of you have probably been there. And then we might talk with a teacher about it. And in addition to getting some tips on posture, you might receive the instruction not to turn away from the pain, but to lean into it, to take interest in that discomfort. Notice how the pain isn't actually a fixed, unmoving mass, but it shifts, it changes, it recedes, and it advances. And when we get to know it, maybe eventually it's no longer something we need to push away or run away from. I bring this up because when I first entered practice, I was desperate for relief from the pain in my life. My own personal suffering that I was trying so hard to come to terms with. I had so many earnest questions about how to find relief, how to find ease, how to come to terms with the world. And I'd spent most of my life trying to run away from my pain and suffering. Now, over the years of practice, I like to think that maybe I've clarified a lot of those questions that I'd had, a lot of that initial desperate angst. But today, it seems like I have 100 more questions. And trying to find answers in Zen, at least for me, it's kind of like that mythical monster, the Hydra, where you cut off one head and then two heads pop up. Because while I'd clarified a lot of my own personal trauma and pain, you know, I found that Zen practice inevitably led me to opening my eyes to the suffering of others, the suffering in the world. You know, no longer Kojin in this little box, but Kojin existing in interdependence. And I found that I couldn't turn away from that. I'd found some freedom, but then I'd opened myself up. And even today, I struggle so much with coming to terms with what I see happening in the world. My questions have shifted as my practice has shifted. But the fundamental question of suffering is still there. And that's why I continue to practice, because there's still a lot that's unresolved for me. And I don't know if there's any definite resolution, if there's ever finality. If there was, then I think our teachers would probably hang up their robes and go retire on a beach. And I appreciate how in many of our Zen stories, these koans that we study, that many of the monks have this same eagerness for answers, the same angst that we might experience. The same fundamental question comes up repeatedly. What is the meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West? And for those of you that don't know, the patriarch is a reference to Bodhidharma, who is seen as the person that brought Zen or Chan to China. So this question, what is the meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West, might also mean, what is the meaning of practice, of Zen? What's the meaning of living my life as I am right now? To live in this world where sometimes the suffering we see or experience can feel overwhelming. It's the question that most everyone has when they first come to practice, and might still have after years or decades of practice. What are our lives in the midst of the terrible death that we've been witnessing in Israel and Palestine? Continued police brutality. What is our practice when we have arguments with our loved ones? Stress out about money. Date. In the face of all of that, we have to ask, what or how do we practice? What's the meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West? For me, sometimes the answer feels so far away. When I see what's happening in the world, in our own streets of New York City. Yet at the same time, the answer isn't so different from that mundane example of back pain during meditation retreat. If we can include that suffering in our experience, become intimate with it, then we can take interest in it and notice how it shifts, how it changes. Pain and suffering then has a seat at the table, and that's the opportunity to work with it. By holding it closely, that's the opportunity for transformative work. Naturally, there's a Zen story, or koan, related to this. It's case 20 in the Blue Cliff Record, and it also pops up in the Book of Serenity. Excuse me. So Ryuge, a monk, asked the teacher Suibi, "What's the meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West?" And Suibi said to him, "Pass me the meditation brace." So from my understanding, a meditation brace back then was an accessory to help someone sit zazen. In another translation, it's called a chin rest. So I imagine it's something designed to make sitting zazen a little bit easier. And I think some of you might know what's about to happen. Anyone that's familiar with these old Zen stories knows that there's a teachable moment about to come up. So when Ryuge gives the teacher the meditation brace, Suibi hits him. Whack. So what's Suibi trying to show Ryuge? He asks Ryuge to pass him an instrument that makes sitting more comfortable, then hits him. We're in a time where, amazingly, meditation is pretty mainstream. And I think it's so great that there's so much talk about the importance of directing our energy and our attention inward. But then it seems like suddenly every Instagram influencer is a meditation teacher. And out of that, 100 feel-good meditation techniques have popped up. And I can't help but think about the stereotype. And I say this lovingly because I know people like this. The stereotype of the love and light meditation teacher, surrounded by crystals and singing bowls and sage, asking students to open their third eye, breathe light into their heart chakra, and push away all their problems. You know the look. But anyone that's been sitting zazen, even if just for a little while, knows that the answer isn't in directing ourselves towards a certain experience. It's not about accessorizing our practice to make it more love and light, to escape our suffering or try to bury it under the rug. I think we all know what happens when we try to bypass our pain or suffering. Just like back pain on meditation retreats sometimes, there's no escaping it. So upon asking Ryuge to pass him the meditation brace, Suibi hits him, shows him that the answer isn't in escaping pain or suffering. There is no escape. And there's also no separating ourselves from it. I think most of us, understand from experience that if we try to separate, we only create more suffering. And we also miss out on our lives too. But the story goes on, and I love that Ryuge doesn't let Suibi have the final word on the matter, but he pushes back. After being hit, he responds to Suibi by saying, "Since you hit me, I let you hit me. In essence, though, there is no meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West." So what's this no meaning that Ryuge is talking about? There's no meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West. In that moment of being hit, what is no meaning? Now, I don't think this is a place of nihilism. It's not a void, devoid of meaning. I think it's just the opposite. A place of experiencing fully, of being utterly saturated. Maybe a place where we can sit in the midst of pain or discomfort, experiencing the turbulence of a hurricane without getting blown over, being with our open awareness without having to write a whole damn novel about it. I think that might be the no meaning that Ryuge is pointing to, where we can let go of our meticulously organized and itemized labels of the world and simply sit in the midst of our awareness, even if it's pain or suffering. The ironic thing is that a lot of us enter practice to find relief from suffering. But at least I've found that as I practice, I only open myself up more intimately to it. But the good news, and there is good news, is I think we also expand with it. And we're able to hold it with a bit more space. And then suffering, instead of this boogeyman that feels stifling and claustrophobic, it can be transformative and motivation for action. So in the story, it doesn't seem like Ryuge is satisfied with Suibi's response, because he goes on to ask another teacher, the great master Rinzai, and asks him the same question. What is the meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West? And this time, Rinzai asks Ryuge to pass him the meditation cushion. I think you probably know what's about to happen. After Ryuge passes it, Rinzai hits him. Whack. And then Ryuge gives Rinzai the same response he gave Tsuibi. Since you have hit me, I let you hit me. In essence, though, there is no meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West. So Rinzai asks Ryuge to pass him the most basic meditation accessory, the meditation cushion. And even then, he's met with a hit. We can't even hold on to our ideas of Zazen. When I read about the overwhelming things that are happening in the world, the injustice in our country, or even walk down the very streets of my city here, arguing with my very racist mother, I sometimes feel an overwhelming helplessness. But I feel most helpless when I feel most separate from that suffering. When I am stuck in my own identity and self-righteous political and social agenda. That's when I really feel like an outsider looking in. And there's a line in the pointer that I think captures this really well. And if you don't know, the pointer is an accompaniment to the koan and kind of acts like a clue. The line says, if you linger in thought, holding back your potential, you'll be bitterly cramped. It's kind of like being stuck in a box of identity. But if only for a moment, I think, if we let go of all of our hard-fought ideas, how things should and shouldn't be, our ideas of practice, ideas of compassion, why the patriarch came from the West, and simply open ourselves to experiencing, I think that's the opportunity where suffering can be transformative. This intimate place of no meaning, I think, is where we have unlimited potential to function. It's where creativity lives, where we can respond spontaneously, maybe a bit more free from our hardened conditioning. In the midst of pain, but no meaning, no meditation cushion, no practice or even Zen. It seems to me a place where there's nothing to hold on to, but we don't need to hold on to anything. Now, if we were all monastic monks, I'd leave it at Ryuge's last word, there is no meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West. But we're not. We're all householders, navigating families, money, sex, politics. Someone has to pay the bills and cook dinner. And we're a very socially engaged Sangha. So personally, I would argue that this koan is only one side of the coin. At the same time that there's no meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West, there's also great meaning. No meaning and a whole lot of meaning. Sometimes it's skillful and necessary to use the meditation brace, the meditation cushion. And if we get hit, we must respond. If we see others suffer, we must respond. Injustice, response. I think this koan points to an important fundamental starting point, a place of endless potential and creativity from which we can function. A place where maybe we can function with a little bit more clarity, a little more wisdom, without leaving a bigger mess in the world. And that's the place, that point of contact between our formal meditation practice and our daily lives that I'm most excited about. It's what drives me to continue practicing. And I think that's where we can really be skillful in affecting change in the world. And, I think we're all in the right place. The fact that we're here practicing with the village Zendo. So I'll just bookmark the end of my talk with the sound of the birds outside.